All right, well, it's 2:15. So in the interest of packing everything that we have to share in 15 minutes, I'm Devon Waugh, the instruction librarian for NC Live. And here with me is Claire Leverett, our associate director.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about what NC Live has been doing around accessibility and providing accessibility support to all of our libraries. So we're going to start out with a couple of questions. So first of all, this is a question more to respond to in chat, but we'd like to do what your library is currently doing for accessibility. And if you're not currently doing anything for accessibility, you can put that too. We did a survey of all of our libraries in November, December time period. And these are some of the questions we asked libraries. So we're interested to hear from this group what you all are doing. So I guess while we do that, see if we have any chat responses for that. We'll go ahead and launch our other poll questions too.
Yep.
So we'd like to know if your library requires accessibility training, and if NC Live was to provide an accessibility service, what service would you find the most helpful?
All right, so we have about half of folks have participated in the poll, so we'll give a little bit more time for that, just 15, 20 seconds or so. So we have one person who their library does require accessibility training. We have mostly no's and a couple of I'm not sure's. For the person whose library requires accessibility training, if you want to share in the chat what that is, I feel like we'd all love to know. And then what NC Live accessibility service would you find the most helpful? Guides and tools were the top choice, followed by training and then statewide advocacy. Awesome, thanks y'all.
Yeah, thank you. And that's really interesting, especially for the second question, because when I get to our survey results, it differed a little bit with our survey. The results of this group differed a little bit with the survey. And specifically for guides and tools, I'd love to know more about what types of guides and tools you think would be helpful. All right, so get started with the slideshow. Oop, that was not what I wanted to do. Let's start with the slideshow. So like I mentioned, we put out a survey in December 2022. NC Live formed an accessibility task force in the fall. And this group was made up of one member from each of our communities of interest. And after talking to the task force, they decided that it would be good to survey our libraries to figure out what exactly NC Live could be doing to help libraries with accessibility. And this is because earlier in the year, when NC Live was doing our strategic planning, and we asked libraries, what in general would you like NC Live to be doing for you? One of the top results of the strategic planning survey was that libraries wanted help with accessibility. And so we knew that this was something that libraries wanted help with, but we didn't know what exactly NC Live could be doing with accessibility for libraries. We wanted to make sure we were on the right track, providing the right types of services and help. So in our survey, we had 111 respondents, and most of the respondents were from public libraries, but it was a pretty, the breakdown of libraries was pretty on point with what the breakdown of respondents was pretty on point with the breakdown of our libraries. So we do have around 43% of our libraries are public libraries, around 13% are UNC system libraries. So in that respect, it was very even to the type of library we have in our membership. Oops, let's get too far ahead here. So one of the questions we asked, which is the question I just asked you all, how beneficial would you find these accessibility services? So in the survey we put out in the fall, statewide advocacy was the service that respondents felt would be the most helpful. And statewide advocacy means that NC Live advocates with all of the NC Live vendors to make our resources more accessible. And then training, of course, was next. Accessibility documentation, which I take that to mean documents on our website, such as VPATs, that show that libraries can then use for their own accessibility purposes. And then guides and tools was, I guess, the response that had the least number of clicks. But I mean, all these responses did get a high number of responses, so you can all say they're all very important. But that's why I was hoping that if in this group, if somebody wants to elaborate on what types of guides and tools they think would be helpful, that would be really interesting to us to hear, that if we want to try to provide that service, which types of guides and tools should we be focusing on? So we've actually done, NC Live so far has done the three ones that had the most votes in the survey. We've already been working on. We've been working on statewide advocacy. We've been doing training, which Devon will be talking about, and we've been doing accessibility documentation. So right now I'm going to talk about what we've been doing for statewide advocacy and what we've been doing for the accessibility documentation. So in terms of statewide advocacy, we are incorporating accessibility language into all of our licenses with the vendors. So this is the accessibility statement that we will be putting into all of our licenses in this upcoming resource cycle. And we've been putting it in our licenses that we've been doing so far this year. So this licensing language comes from the UNC system, which we work with the UNC system legal for all of our licenses, and this is the one that they recommend. But as you can tell, it does have a sentence in there about if the product is not living up to accessibility requirements, or it has complaints or concerns, the licensor does agree to respond and resolve these concerns. So this is the language that we are going to be putting in our licenses, and it may, of course, be it may be amended slightly depending on what we and the vendor agree to, but this is what we are going to be advocating for. So I'm going to exit out of this slideshow and then just do a screen share for a couple of minutes. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the website to show you what we've been doing and where we have all these accessibility materials on our website. So it's under for librarians, and then under accessibility and terms of use. So we've always had our always linked to the accessibility and the VPAT statement for all of our vendors on our website. But recently in December, we did an accessibility audit of all of our vendor platforms and all of our subscription resources. We didn't do it for our permanent resources, but we did it for the subscription resources. And the website advisory committee helped us out with this audit. So we used Wave and we used some manual checks. And then I've linked to all the information that we provide. We sent all of these audits to the vendors, and then I've linked to the report that we sent them. And then I've also linked to what their response has been. So for Credo reference, you can see it will take you out to the report we sent the vendors, so what errors we found, and just more details about the errors. And then we I'll link to their vendor response. So for Creo, it was that they were moving to a new platform in 2023. So they're not going to, in June, so they're not going to be addressing any issues before they move to their new platform. But we have gotten a response from all of our vendors, and most of our vendors are working on the errors. They're in development right now. So we'll be checking back in with the vendors to see, following up to make sure that they are indeed fixing these issues that they said they were going to and that have been in development. But several of the resources are moving to a new platform. Credo is one of them, Morningstar, and Sage as well. So that's what we've been doing so far. And I will hand it off to Devon to talk about training.
Absolutely. Let me share my slides now. All right. So in the survey, we did cover what people wanted with accessibility training, but also wanted context on what training had been provided to them in the past. So we found that by and large, consistent with what you all shared in the poll, most libraries do not require accessibility training. Sometimes it is something that their institution, if they're a community college or a four-year college, might offer through their IT department. Sometimes that's required, sometimes that's not. And then with some folks, they shared, I'm not sure. So I think that also goes with advocacy and spreading the word about the importance of accessibility in libraries. Now, when we asked what training on accessibility that people wanted the most, Accessibility 101 was the most requested topic. And that's really just kind of a primer on web accessibility, how to advocate for changes to your library's website, and really just doing simple things in using links, as well as making sure there's alternate text with images shared on the website, in social media, and in documents that the library prepares. And followed closely by web accessibility, online library services accessibility, and e-resource accessibility. We also had requests for instructional design accessibility and universal design for learning, working with assistive technology, advocacy, physical spaces, and working with vendors. So based on how highly requested these topics were, we wanted to make sure that the training that we started to offer in February reflected that. But before I share that, we also asked people in the survey what was the most valuable training that they had on accessibility. And what we saw was a couple of folks mentioned a pre-conference that happened at NCLA in, I believe, 2017 or 2019. And then some shared their town's ADA training for public library respondents. Several of them cited that ADA training or training on the accessibility of physical spaces as being important, but not necessarily being familiar with the web accessibility side of things. And then other people mentioned Alan Unsworth's presentation on VPATs at NCLA a few years ago. And with this, I do want to stress that this was a few years ago. And so it's always good to have a refresher, because web accessibility and its landscape has changed significantly in the last couple of years, and it continues to change. And so in terms of what we started to offer in February, we hosted 4 virtual sessions. We had over 400 attendees from our member libraries, as well as some of our partner consortia around the United States. And the most popular session that we offered was accessibility in library instruction and programming. And that was hosted by Garrison Libby from Central Piedmont Community College. He was part of the accessibility task force that was organized in the fall, who advised us on the survey, the needs assessment that we sent out. And so I reached out to him, and he was happy to organize a session, but also found he felt a little out of his depth with that. But it was very successful. We have all the recordings for these sessions on our YouTube channel. The session that I also want to highlight as well, in terms of the topics that we covered, so we did host one on web accessibility basics. That was the session that started off the series. And that was with me, Altanya Washington, and Eva Earls. Both serve on our continuing education and training advisory committee. We had some friends from TRLN's accessibility working group who led a session on e-resources licensing. They created a guide that they published in December. I'm just going to add it to the chat now, on negotiating accessibility in e-resources licensing, where they offer a lot of documentation on how to do that. But it was really great to hear them share their expertise in the e-resources realm. The other topic that we did include in the series was supporting the job searches of patrons with disabilities. Now, that was a session that was involved Craig Hayward, who was part of Accessible Books and Services in the State Library, as well as folks from the Division of Vocational Rehab Services, the Division of Deaf and Hard of Hearing folks, a lot of statewide agency experts. And we found in feedback from the series that people really appreciated that last session, hearing from statewide experts and a couple of folks who are experts who also live with a disability or condition and kind of can speak to their own experience. And so we really tried to make the series as practical as possible. And we want to continue to offer sessions like that because we know it is very much in demand. And we want to offer more on the accessibility of physical spaces, as well as in-person programming, knowing that you all do so much working in your communities and interacting with folks. And so in terms of next steps, what I have to share is we will be having our DEIA learning series, the 3rd annual series in November. And we are looking to offer more accessibility programming with TRLN and some other partners. So stay tuned for more training available on that. And Claire, do you have any next steps to kind of add as well?
Yeah, next steps are continuing our licensing process with our vendors and continuing to advocate for accessibility in our licenses, and then following up on the accessibility audits we did with our vendors. So that was our lightning talk. We went a little over time, but so we don't have any time for question and answer, but we'd love to hear from you if you have questions or you have comments on things that you think we could be doing with accessibility and which your library would find helpful. Please let us know because we constantly need that feedback to make sure that we're on the right track. So thanks so much to everyone for coming. And our next session is at 2:45.
Yes, 2:45. If you have any questions for us, we have our emails here. It's just Devon at NC Live and Claire at NC Live. And our next session at 2:45 will be our last sessions of the conference. So I hope you all have been having a good day. And we'll see you at our final sessions at 2:45.
Yeah, thanks everyone.